When did you think you were about to die in your own home? Someone walked past my window, which might not have been that weird except I'm on the 8th frickin' floor. I almost had a cardiac. Apparently there were renovations being done on the building and they were building the scaffolding up to my level. There's a state prison less than a mile away from my house. When I was 18, my family was out of town. My dad called the house saying someone had escaped from the prison and to lock all the doors and have something handy to protect myself with, which I did. It was at night and I turned on the police scanner. He was incarcerated for the unspeakable act with over a dozen teenage girls. I looked out the window in the back door just in time to see a man in an orange jumpsuit jogging through my backyard, stop, see me, and start walking towards my back door. Next thing I knew, police ran into him and tackled him. One of the most terrifying moments of my life. This was back when we still had a landline at my house. Ours was the very last one on the line, so it sometimes did funny things like ring for no reason or just drop a call in the middle. One night I was home alone and it started to storm really bad, and the phone rings. I pick up and it's the woman from 911 asking why I called. I say, "I didn't call 911. I've just received a call from this number. Are you home alone?" "Yeah, no one could have made that call." "Are you sure? Would you like me to send a car?" In my head, I was thinking, God, yes, come save me. But I said, "I don't think so. I really didn't call." "Okay, ma'am. Have a good night." I sat on my couch with my dog and didn't move till my parents came home. It freaked me the frick out. In short, on a dark, stormy night, my phone called 911 by itself. For people saying they would have sent a car out anyway, 1, I live at the end of a very long private drive, so they very well could have sent one by and I wouldn't have known it. 2, this was only the first time it happened, and the second time they actually did send someone. I mean, having your house's weird phone lines get you blocked from the emergency services line because there were too many non-urgent calls seems like it could be a really bad thing in the long run. What a strange phenomenon. When I was about 8, my bedroom was full of windows with no blinds. One day I heard something outside, but I was too scared to go to the window to see. The next day I went outside and there were footprints in the snow around my windows. For the next week or so I'd refused to sleep in that room. So every morning when my mother got up, she'd find me asleep under the living room table. One night as I was under the table, I heard someone at the back door. They were jiggling the doorknob trying to get in. I ran into my mother's room screaming and she called the police. Sure enough, the same shoe prints were at the back door. The police said there had been a bunch of break-ins in the area. In short, someone was stalking my house when I was 8. When I was a young lad, staying with cousins in the Dales, in Oregon, in a quasi-rural area, we had a huge yard and the nearest house was maybe a quarter mile away. Anyway, the 5 of us kids were out playing after dark. The idea was that one person would go and hide and the other 4 would count and then come find the hidden person, who would then try to run back to base without being tagged. My oldest cousin, who was perhaps 12, hid and the rest of us set out in different directions as per usual. Someone yelled, "I see him," and we all come running and give chase. The chase does not go in the direction of the base, however, but towards a bunch of trees. The 4 of us more or less had the trees surrounded when my cousin came out from another direction. Once he appears, the person cornered in the trees headed towards the road. We found out the next day that the neighbors had someone break into their house. In short, me and 3 other 8 to 10-year-olds cornered someone who was probably a burglar, thinking he was it in a game of tag. Luckily, I wasn't alone for mine. Me and my wife were at one of her friends' houses. It was about 10 at night when the doorbell rang. We all stopped talking and stare at each other. I ask if anyone has ever come over this late or if she was expecting someone. She said no. So I go to the front of the house and look out at the window and don't see anyone. So I open the door and there's a mutilated dead squirrel right on the welcome mat. We turned on the floodlights on the house and looked around but didn't see or hear anyone. It freaked all of us the frick out and we never found out who did it or why, but just assumed it was some jerk kid. I grew up on a ranch about 10 miles from the nearest town. One of our favorite things to do in the summer was to spread out a few sleeping bags in our backyard and have campouts. We had a huge dark activated light attached to our barn that we'd turn off with a high-powered flashlight to tell ghost stories and try to scare each other. One night I had 2 of my friends over for a campout. We shut off the barn light and sat in complete darkness. If you haven't been out in the country, it might be hard to appreciate exactly how pitch black it can be. We were talking in those low, scary story voices. One of my friends was in the middle of her story. Probably the one about the serial killer licking that girl's hand, when she just stopped short. She said, "Who's that?" and pointed up the road. We all looked and saw what she was talking about. You could barely make out the figure, certainly the silhouette of a person walking down the road. That was unusual enough, but the way this person was walking was what was unsettling. The figure was standing straight up and was walking in such a stiff and unnatural way that he or she could have been marching. We couldn't make out any other defining features of the figure. After watching and having a whispered debate on what to do, we decided the best course of action would be to shout at the figure. I screamed, "Who are you?" at the top of my 12-year-old lungs. One of my friends pointed the flashlight at the figure, but it was too far away to distinguish any features. The figure did hear us and just sort of turned around, walking in that particular way. We watched until they were out of sight, and then we woke up my parents. I still have no idea who he or she was or what they were doing way out in the country. I went downstairs to get some water at about 2 a.m. In the kitchen, we've got a clock on the wall. As I walk into the room, acutely aware of every creak that echoes around the house surrounding me, I heard the fast wind of something mechanical. As I glanced slowly to my left, subconsciously grabbing my glass a little tighter, I see the clock hands on the wall spinning at about 50 times the normal speed. Around and around and around. I think to myself very clearly, this is how movies start. This is it. I was ready to defend myself with my glass whilst dashing over to grab a knife. It was then that I realized we had a radio clock which automatically sets itself. I'd never seen it do that before. It was now 1 a.m. The narrator doesn't know what this contraption is and why it was resetting at 2 a.m. in particular. I think this might be a device of ages past. I'd probably have been up all night with that weapon, to be honest. This one is absolutely true. Many years ago, I lived in a big, old 3-story house that had a room on the middle level that we converted into an office. I used to write financial reports late at night that were published early in the morning. The office had a few computers, and my toddler son had been playing on one of them for most of the evening, right up until I finished work at around 9 p.m. By then, he had fallen asleep, so I switched off his monitor, scooped him up, and took him to bed, flicking off the light as I left. For the next couple of hours, I relaxed in another room watching TV with my wife. She went to bed about 11 p.m., and at midnight, I decided to do the same. I realized I'd left a window open in the office, so I went in there to close it. The house was silent and the room was pitch black dark and ice cold when I walked in. Colder than it should have been for the time of year, even with the window open. I paused for a moment in the center of the room to think about this, and then it happened. Bink, bink, bink. Something was tapping on the glass. But it wasn't the random tappings of a bird or another kind of animal. It was completely uniform. It sounded human, but I was on the second floor, so how was that possible? It was so dark, but I couldn't make anything out against the black glass. But a few moments later, it happened again. Bink, bink, bink. By now, I was already feeling on edge, and then something happened that chilled me to the core. Because out of the corner of the room to my right, from the darkness, a high-pitched, almost squeaky voice began to speak quite loudly. "I can see you." I froze on the spot. My blood went cold, my bowels prepared for evacuation. My God, I thought, I never wrote that book. Any book. It spoke again, but with greater emphasis on that all-important word. "I can see you." I was determined that I was almost certainly screwed, so I figured, what the hell? I turned slowly to my right and walked into the darkness until I finally reached my son's computer. Nothing there but an empty chair. But no talking now, just silence. A horrible silence. Carefully, I reached over and switched on the monitor. The screen brightened and there it was. Something red and horrible. Once again, it tapped on the glass. It was fricking Elmo on my kid's Sesame Street game. A plain white van would creep very slowly down our street at around 2 a.m. weekly during the summer. I was 19. Our street was not a dead-end road but had residential roads at either end, preventing it from being a through street, so this van was clearly not making a route of any sort. I'd hear it and watch from my upstairs window bedroom every time it passed by. One night, my parents and brother were out of town and I was home alone, happily sleeping when I heard a car door slam out front. I jumped up to look out the window and the van was backed into our driveway. I couldn't see anyone moving around outside, but the lights were off and they were parked. I ran into the hall and crouched into a ball and tried to listen for any sounds and plan an attack or escape route. I was shaking uncontrollably. A few minutes later, I heard the engine start up and the van tore out of my driveway. I never saw it again. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. It was pretty early in the morning and I heard some weird noises downstairs. My wife was out of town with her mum, so it was just me and the cats in the house, and they were both on the bed with me, and also looked kind of freaked out. So I got up slowly and heard another loud crash and some glass breaking. I didn't own a weapon or anything at the time, so I was looking around for anything which I could use, which ended up being this brass vase thing I kept changing. I grabbed that and crept downstairs, slightly freaking out. More noises than a "ah" noise. Turns out I left the back door open and my goat wandered into the kitchen and crapped everywhere and broke a shelf. I yelled at the goat and he went back outside. I woke up in the middle of the night because my television turned on. I don't have cable, so it's all static. Then it shuts off, and I just lay there not sure of what to think. Then it turns back on, and back off again. This keeps happening, and I was about to crap myself. I start to get up to attempt to look around, and I heard a thud nearby. I bravely run to the switch to turn the lights on and investigate. The remote was trapped between my mattress and the wall, and my moving around in my sleep was pressing the power button. When I got up, it released the remote and it fell to the ground, causing the thud. I'm glad you're more inquisitive than I am, because I think I would have just moved back in with my family and flat out abandoned my house if that happened. It's not worth the risk when the horror movie symptoms start coming up that strong. My sister had some friends over watching horror films, and I was out LANing for most of the night. When I got back at around 1 a.m., all of the lights were off except for the television. I walked up to the back door, trying to open it silently to sneak up and yell, "Boo!" to scare them. The little craps had locked the door. Front door is never open, so my only option to get in was my bedroom window, which I could climb up a tree to access. But I wanted some revenge. I went up to the front door, which is a massive oak thing with a big brass knocker on the inside. Yeah, I don't understand that to this day. I slammed it a dozen times really fast and then bolted around the corner to my window. I climbed inside, hearing them chattering about trying to look out the window to see who was knocking. The door to my room was off kilter, so it swung open slowly if unlatched, and it creaked like mad. So I turned the knob to unlatch it and stand behind the door. Crack. Dead silence from the chatter squad. My sister apparently was the bravest of the bunch because she walked in and tried to flick on the light. The switch is beside the fully opened door, so when she reached for it, I grabbed her arm. Such a scream, and the best part was that one of her friends bolted out of the house and ran home in her pajamas before she had a chance to hear the relieved sigh. Fun times last decade. One time, the floor outside my room creaked a little bit. It was probably a murderer with a knife. When I was a young lad, I could never get to sleep, so I'd just stare out of the window and look at the night sky. One night, my parents had just gone to the shop thinking that I was asleep. I got out of bed and walked over to the window, ready to stare at the sky and imagine flying to another planet. But instead of stars, I saw a face staring right at me. It had a wild look in his eyes and his hair was all scraggly and matted. I screamed in terror and dove back under the covers, but not before I saw the face disappear, its eyes widening, mouth open in horror. Half an hour later, still shocked from seeing this face, I heard my parents' car drive into the driveway. The door slammed and I heard the sound of feet crunching on gravel. I heard a scream. An ear-splitting, blood-curdling scream. Thinking my parents had seen the face too, I rushed downstairs, opened the front door, and almost tripped over a body lying on the floor. It was the face. I screamed too and walked backwards, stumbling on the step into our house and falling backwards. My dad called an ambulance and the cops ushered me and my mum into the kitchen. We were both in shock, and my dad was too. We stayed up all night. In the morning, things became clear. The man, a known unspeakable act offender, had fallen from my balcony and hit his head on the wall, killing him instantly. I never told my parents I saw the face. When I was younger, I was home alone in a house that I know was haunted. It was not uncommon to hear people walking around the house in parts where no one was staying. Doors would mysteriously open and shut themselves, and one door would always lock from the inside. One night, I was home alone. It was late and I was just watching some TV. I hear the all-too-familiar noise of a door shutting and then footsteps of someone coming up the stairs to the main floor. I look, expecting to see my parents, but there were none. The footsteps then continued to walk right past me, and then proceeded to walk up the stairs to the top floor, with the door at the top of the stairs shutting. I freaked the frick out, technical term, and shouted, "Is anyone there?" To which I hear a whispered response in my ear of, "No." Needless to say, I ran the frick out of the house. I live in the woods of Canada, about 8 kilometers outside the town of Bragg Creek. I've been a city boy all my life, so adapting to the difference of living in nature has been an adventure. The silence, the absolute inky blackness of moonless nights, the way the trees surrounding the house are turned into a bright duotone of black and blue, casting impossibly long, mournful shadows on nights where the moon is out. But the beauty of daytime has made adapting relatively easy, and I was surprised at how quickly I was growing accustomed to my new surroundings. Then one night, a month into living there, I was awakened by something in the middle of the night. My heart pounding, and with that sense it was a noise that you can almost remember that woke you up. I was alone. My girlfriend had spent the night in town with friends, and it was so dark I couldn't see my hand an inch in front of my face if I tried. I lay awake, hearing the breeze rustle the leaves faintly outside the open window, when a nearly indescribable lingering scream erupted in the night. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding like a beast trying to escape my chest. Again, the scream cuts through the night, starting my mind racing. What the frick is that? Insane explanations flew into my mind. Is it a woman? A monster? An injured animal? A fricking alien? 4 or 5 times more, the scream pierces the silence, mostly getting further from my home. I got up and closed the window and crazily went back to sleep. The next morning I emailed my neighbor about an acre away to see if they heard the same thing. He had, and he knew what it was. Apparently, it was the sound of a mother cougar calling her cubs, and that call is famous for sounding like a woman in distress. I haven't heard it since. I walked in on my roommate once who was tickling his pickle to a video of old people doing the deed. What has been seen cannot be unseen. Yeah, although not quite in the spirit of some of the other stories we've had here, that one would certainly be its own kind of haunting, wouldn't it? I can certainly see myself moving after that one. When I was younger, maybe 13 to 14, my sister and I were home alone. We lived in a very rural area on a dirt road, and the nearest neighbor was over a mile away. We were instructed to not open the door for anyone, no matter what. So we're just hanging out, playing video games, watching TV, among other things, and the dogs started barking. We heard the distinctive sound of a vehicle door closing. Next thing we know, someone is banging on the door. We went to peek outside the windows, and there was this guy we'd never seen before out there. So we just sat in the corner, peering out of the window, trying to be very quiet and hoping he'd just go away. Then, out of nowhere, this freak tries to open our door, which is of course locked. Well, we really start to panic, and he could probably hear us crying and saying stuff like, "Oh my god, what if he breaks in? Get the phone!" He's obviously getting more and more annoyed because he just keeps shaking the door harder and trying to twist the locked doorknob. Then, all of a sudden, he just stopped. He walked back to his truck, got in, and left. We, of course, immediately called our parents, and all of this led to my dad getting 2 German shepherds and a chain-link fence. We still to this day have no fricking clue what he wanted or why he tried to get into our house. We're just really thankful he didn't. I can still feel the fear trying to reassure myself that this one wasn't real. So here we go. July 2009, I was spending some time at my parents' farm in upstate New York. We have a lot of land, but no animals. The farm across the road has cows, but at this time they were penned up and what I saw definitely wasn't bovine. Around 6 p.m, my parents left for Cape Cod, repeating every rule and precaution that they could muster as I ushered them out the door. One last reminder to put food and water in the barn before it was too dark. We keep the door cracked open and leave water for the wild cats that keep the mice population at bay. Excited for the soon-to-come Faptoberfest, I forgot everything I was supposed to do. It wasn't until around 8 p.m. that I started to hear a barely audible crying from outside. It wasn't human, but it still had that strange whimper that drew my attention. I flicked the porch lights on and checked out the window. There was a small black cat that, when I opened the door, limped across my back lawn in the direction of my barn. The door was now closed, and as strange as this seemed to me, I was more uneasy than scared. I figured my dad must have put something away and left it. I walked down my driveway, peered into the dark room, and heard what sounded like gasps for air. Now completely freaked out and discouraged by the fleeting light, I turned around and ran towards the house. Not 2 steps later, I hear shattered glass on the back of the barn, and I freeze. What walked towards me was a dark brown animal, no larger than a fox, that started bounding towards the closest trees. It zigzagged to the edge of the long grass, then stood up and waded through the woods. I still to this day have no idea what it was, but the broken window was blamed on me, and my sighting was never explained. And the final nail in the coffin, 2 of the cows, which were freaking huge, were found with their necks torn open while they were still inside their pen. Everyone on my road blamed coyotes, but to this day I know it was something else. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.